Good evening, everybody. Let's talk about the difference between hitting hard and hitting the right target. All right, I've been hit. My nose has been busted more than once. I've been hit with knees to the legs. I've been hit with knees to the face. I've been hit with numerous punches and kicks to my face, to my head, in sparring. I've been hit full contact in point sparring. I've been hit full contact in light sparring that got ugly. I've been hit full contact with bare fists in actual fights, on the street, in the barracks, in all kinds of situations. I've been hit. And so I know a couple of things about what it feels like to be hit. So let's talk about a couple of instances. So I was in the barracks. I've talked about this incident where I was being held in a headlock by one person who would take pot shots at my face with uppercutting motions, and then his buddy was uppercutting my face. And then I started hitting them in the testicles, and they let go. And I stood up, and one of them recovered his wind a little faster, so he started punching me in the face, and the other guy started punching me in the face, and then my buddies joined in and punched them in the face. But because they jumped in, they were able to kind of get good jaw knockouts, and those other two guys were knocked the fuck out, right? And but I mean, I must have gotten hit like a minimum of 10 to 15 times. Could it have been 20? I got hit over and over again. I got hit with lefts and rights and straights and hooks and uppercuts, and I was still conscious, all right? Just before my buddies jumped in, I had kind of dropped to my knees again, and I feel, in retrospect, I got knocked down but not out. I think the momentum of the punches took me down as much as the concussion of the punches, if that makes sense. And I didn't lose consciousness. It hurt. It was disorienting. It was stunning, but I was still conscious enough to see my friends intervene, conscious enough to see these two guys eventually get knocked out. It was a group fight. So think of that. Now let's backtrack. I'm a little younger. I'm in grade school, not yet in high school, and my friend Sean, who was like one of my best friends in the neighborhood, big tall black kid, he was a martial artist, so I looked up to him, and I was kind of a martial artist. I was barely a white belt, but he had some cool stuff. He said an uncle showed him, and we'd spar sometimes, and it would look a lot like the Game of Death, where Bruce Lee fights Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because one guy is just so much taller than the other, and he's got all these rangy punches and kicks, and I'm just trying to keep up. But there was at one point, I don't know what I came in with, but Sean jumped up in the air, raised his fist, pow, came down with a hammer fist right on the top of my head. Now, mind you, if you know your acupuncture points, that's called Baihui, 1,000 convergences, and it's basically where the coronal sutures merge and first begin to harden in the baby, right? Because babies have soft bones, and the sutures are incredibly soft. Like a really hard push, I think, could probably damage that child. Which is why you hold their head so carefully, right? But I mean, that dropped me instantly. I was down on my knees, then flat on my back. I saw nothing but stars, and I don't know if I lost consciousness or not, which tells you I probably did, even if for a split second. And then at some point, I remember Sean helping me back up and like, "You okay?" And I mean, like, "Damn, dude, you hit me hard." And maybe he didn't think he was hitting me hard, which kind of indicates that that's a hell of a place to hit someone. If you can get the leverage, I guess if you're tall and you can, instead of an overhead right, bow, wow, a hammer fist right there. And I think for a weapon that would be a very lethal spot. Imagine an axe, a hammer, a tomahawk, a sword strike, right? But it is a taller person's weapon. But bear in mind, later in life, I discovered I could take punches. Boy, could I take punches. So think about that. Think about shot placement, angle, and delivery versus raw volume and power. Right? Let's move on to another incident where I got hit. I was green belt, I think. Goju Daute Karate Do. I was in high school, and it was like my second year of karate, right? And I was really into the Wing Chun books, all right, and Jeet Kune Do, and studying all these different styles, and I was enamored with Kung Fu, so I would, practice the Kung Fu moves by myself, watch the movies, but I was taking karate. That's what was available. So we had a guy join. His name was John Palumbi. And he was about 29 at the time, and I think he weighed about 300 pounds, and it was very solid 300 pounds, and one of his jobs was a bouncer. And so he joined our class, and I was a small kid, we were sparring once, and I was just doing what I was trained to do, which is I pulled every shot I threw. He'd move, I'd throw a roundhouse kick, a side kick, a hook kick, a back fist, a reverse punch, and I was landing on him at will, and he wasn't really defending much. And I don't know, I might have said, like, hey, you need to block those and counter back, and I think that made him mad, and he grabbed me by the lapels, ran forward into a wooden column we had. We were in a Fred Astaire dance studio. He slams me against the wall, right? And he punched me. I'm trying to remember if he punched me before I got to the wall and before the grab, or somewhere during that process, but I remember I felt the vibrations in my toes. He was a big, full-grown man, and I was a teenager, And then I remember my back slamming against the wall, and my head slamming against that wall. And fully cognizant, I had I decided I was going to execute control techniques that I'd been experimenting with. So, I did kind of like a low open hand, like simulating grabbing his groin, then a chop here, and then a poke to the eye, and I didn't hit with any of the blows, and Jeff was like, put him down, John, put him down, and then, he broke us up. Honestly, I think if I was teaching, I would not do that. I would not take a 15-year-old green belt and match him with this big, huge guy that obviously had a temper problem, right? And who was a bouncer. Like, and he was new. Like, I don't know if that was his second or third day there. And much later, when I went off in the Marines, he got his black belt, and then years later, I was riding my bike around Hamilton and the region, and I saw him. I'm like, hey, John, and he was like, I remember you when you were a snot-nosed kid. And I was like, I was never a snot-nosed kid when he knew me. I was a teenager, but I was way ahead of the curve in terms of like my focus, my attention, I knew what my purpose in life was. I knew where I was going. I knew what I wanted. Like, John was what I would call a snot-nosed adult at that age. He was 29 years old, very angry, and he's in like a sporting type of match, and he blew his top and stepped out of the rules and probably was on the verge of beating me to death, and maybe he remembered himself. So I would say that's a snot-nosed adult. But think about it. I got hit by a 290 or 300 plus pound man. I got whacked with a punch, then I got slammed into a wall, and then the back of my head rammed into this thing, and I was conscious, right? and I was still trying to do what was in the rules. So I was like not in a panic state for some reason, right? Sometime around that time, I'm in homeroom in Nottingham High School, and then my friend Scott, who was my best friend at the time and my best friend for a long time, was sitting across from me in a chair, and I was in my chair, and he was in, like, he might have been in the chair next to me because the occupant, it wasn't yet time to, begin the school day, or possibly he was in his chair and I'd moved across to an empty chair, and we were talking about something, and again the topic comes up, martial arts, and he just kind of goes, "Ugh," like a knife hand pops me right in the center of my esophagus. Pop! Not a full power blow. Quick, snappy, but not a full power blow by any means. Probably not full speed. Definitely not deeply focused. Immediately, I could feel it close up on me, and I was coughing, and I was holding my throat, and I was like, it was like that. Think about it. He wasn't 300 pounds. He wasn't over 6'4". He wasn't a full-grown man. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He hit that spot, boy, and things began shutting down. Okay, and I began to panic. I'm like, wait a second, is he killing me? And he's like, you okay? I'm like, you're not supposed to hit there. And the fact that I was talking meant I was starting to recover. But think about that, guys. I don't think the blow was harder than this. All right? I don't think it was harder than that. But full stop. There was just a full stop. If you would have hit me like that in a fight, right? I think I would have been a dead duck, a sitting duck, and a dead duck for the next minute. All right? Especially if you followed through, I think that would have been the end of the fight. Right? So that's not those two techniques I'm talking about are not techniques that are used in the ring. Let's do one more. Okay, let's talk about kicks. I was warming up at a tournament. It was at McGuire Air Force Base, and it was being put on by S.L. Martin. Never have I met a man so thoroughly in love with himself. And I've been around martial artists, right? That's the impression he gave me. And most martial artists are in love with themselves. He was like the promoter of the Grandmaster. And I was warming up with another kid. I'm like, hey, let's spar a little bit, because I'd read in the magazines about the good old days in the 60s where black belts would spar with each other and warm up before a tournament, and then they'd compete, and it was all honorable. I got excited. I started pressing. I got roundhouse kicked right in my groin by a Tang Sudo guy. Like, I would have expected if he got mad, he would just kick me in the face or something. Kick me dead in my groin. And I was like, I kept on fighting for a while. I'm like, all right, well, I wanted to drop. I wanted to drop right away. And I said, all right, I had to keep fighting. And then I'm like, all right, that was good. And I was like, holy fuck, I gotta get out of here. So I walked around till I found the men's room. And I was like, I really gotta pee. I absolutely positively have to pee. And so, I had my gi bottoms on. I pulled them down. I went to the urinal and I took a piss. And it did not feel good, right? And then I began to feel real woozy and nauseous, and I think I got my drawstring tied up. And the next thing I remember, I was waking up. Like, I had just passed out on the floor of the men's room, and there was a referee over me. And, he was in like a suit with an official pin, and he's like, you okay, son? I'm like, I was sparring with someone and I got kicked in the groin, and after I peed, I think I must have passed out. He's like, well, how long were you out? I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, do me a favor. He's like, go in the stall, reach down in your underwear and grab your balls and see if they've been knocked up into your abdomen. I'm like, all right, I did that and I felt them and I'm like, okay, they're still there, and it wasn't super painful to touch them, but I felt very woozy, and I said, I think I'm good. He says, all right. He said, just be careful. And that was the start of a very crappy day at the tournament. I mean, just all kinds of things were going wrong, and everybody was mad at everybody. And, none of the stuff that would have gotten me a point in that tournament was anything we practiced, like leaping back fists and kind of a Superman punch and putting your leg up and hopping and flicking, and there just wasn't anything that resembled anything like we had been training, right? And then I said something to my instructor and he got mad, and he grabbed like some of the other black belts around him, pointed me out, and started like humiliating me. And then he's like, you know what? Because I had ridden up with him, he said, you got to get back by yourself. And we were like, miles and miles and miles away from home. And then some of the people that had gone to the competition, I'm like, can I get a ride? Because Jeff's mad at me. And they're like, yeah, no problem. And it really made me consider like how weird the whole tournament scene and weird the martial arts scene is nowadays. Back then, still is now. The weirdness doesn't go away. It's really hard to communicate about. I wanted realistic training. I wanted to be prepared for the threats around me, because they were around me. There were people actually fighting me and hitting me in my life that I had to deal with. Right, and it seemed like my instructor at my school wanted me to be really, really good at something that wouldn't have been useful in real life to any degree, especially for my shorter height. And that was kind of the beginning of a schism that developed, that eventually resulted in me leaving that school. And the funny thing is, when I got out of the Marine Corps with a legitimate black belt in Taekwondo and cross-training and a bunch of other things, he's like, hey, come back, you'll be a black belt here, you'll teach, and I'll pay you. Because he needed instructors, because he had expanded. So, yeah, these are just some things you should know about. The difference between merely hitting someone and having an effect. And I know, because I've been on the affected end. These things do work. You don't see them in the cage, because the cage isn't set up for that. You can't kick people in the groin. It's kind of like, even with the gloves on and the rules, you can't get to someone's throat like that. And if you do and you chop him, it's illegal, right? And I suppose you could hammer fist the crap out of a shorter person's head, but most people are matched up by weight, and so. Yeah, they work. They're classical techniques. They're not modern techniques, but they work. I know. They've been worked on me. What can I say? And I have a thick head.